So I thought it would be useful to say a little bit about me. There's a selfie I took like 30 minutes ago. Uh, in part because it'll kind of help provide some context for how I'm approaching things and the role that I play in the program. So in my day job, I'm a lecturer in philosophy at Harvard, and then I wear these sort of two other hats in the ethics and tech arena. So I'm the director of ethics and technology initiatives at the Edmund J. Safra Center for Ethics, and as Marcus said, that's a sort of cousin of this center. So like this center, the Safra Center for Ethics has a sort of university-wide mission to advance ethics research at the university. And then, of course, most relevant to today's talk, I co-direct with some other folks I'll highlight shortly the Embedded Ethics Initiative. But I kind of want to emphasize that these roles that I've taken on, both in researching in the ethics of tech arena and in teaching, it still feels quite new to me. So I want to say a little bit about how I ended up here, because although I'm an ethical theorist by training, until a couple of years ago, I really wasn't. Not only was I not doing work in computer science, but I really wasn't doing work that had any application to real life at all. So I was one of these people who spent time thinking about issues in meta-ethics. If that doesn't mean anything to you, that's okay. And like really foundational issues in normative ethical theory. Not the kind of thing that someone could come chat with me about and then learn sort of how to live their life, but instead the kind of thing where someone could chat with me about whether there are any moral truths at all, and if so, how we learn about them. If so, how why they're this way rather than some other way. Okay, so I ended up here in large part due to a teaching collaboration that I kind of stumbled into. So in the fall of 2017, I was convinced / gently coerced into co-teaching in the computer science department with Barbara Gross, whom I'll talk more about. So Barbara, much to her credit, had recognized a sort of urgent need to introduce some ethical content into her own teaching in computer science, and somewhat unusually, at least in my experience, had a pretty good idea of what philosophy as a discipline could bring to that endeavor. So my understanding, and she'll tell you more about this, is that in developing a new course on intelligent systems, design, and ethical challenges, she had always hoped to co-teach it with a philosopher. That wasn't available to her in year one. She ran it again in year two and had a philosophy PhD assisting. And then in year three, I was lying around, not doing any useful ethics. Long story short, met with Barbara and became immediately convinced that this was a good idea, and that she really knew what a sort of teaching marriage between a computer scientist and a philosopher might look like, and what goods it might give rise to. And so I said yes, with enthusiasm, but a great deal of anxiety. I hadn't thought about computer science, I think, since high school, and even then, it was like silly coding in C++. And as I said, although I have plenty of experience teaching applied issues, wasn't really working in close application. But it was terrifically beneficial to me. So I learned so much, not only from Barbara, but from our excellent students. And it really made vivid to me that philosophers hadn't been doing enough to address to address questions on the research side, and also that we were interestingly well positioned to be useful to computer scientists and perhaps other science fields who were interested in making a real effort in ethics education. So around the same time, so that was fall 2017. Shortly before, and then throughout fall 17, Barbara was also at work on laying the foundations for embedded ethics. And so as I was teaching with her, I came to learn more about her efforts in the embedded ethics program, and over time, kind of found myself working to help usher this program along. I should draw attention not only to Barbara, but to Allison Simmons, my colleague in the philosophy department. So far as the real origin of the embedded ethics program, it's all due to them. And really incredibly, I think they just started doing it. It was part of what's led to success for us, I think, is that this is really entirely faculty driven and really almost entirely responsive to student demand. So Barbara perceived, in part through teaching this course in AI, that students are very hungry for addressing ethical challenges alongside learning, becoming experts in the technical areas. Students said, okay, we want more of this, where do we go? And there weren't really a lot of options. So Barbara was put in touch with Allison, I think, by an undergraduate, and Barbara said, okay, we're gonna do something. Let's figure it out. And that has given rise to this program that we now call Embedded Ethics. So let me linger here now to describe in a little more detail, excuse me, how the program works. So, as the name suggests, one core element of the program is that we want to embed ethics expertise into computer science classrooms. For us, that takes the form of getting advanced PhD students from the philosophy department, people who have nearly completed their degrees and are themselves experts in philosophical ethics, into computer science classrooms to provide sort of custom-built ethics content for individual classes. I'll talk more about that in just a bit. So we want to embed. Secondly, we want to distribute. So our ambition is to, I said this last night too, I'm always so tempted to say infiltrate, but it makes it sound like we're unwelcome. But let's stick with that. We want to infiltrate as much of the computer science curriculum as we can. The very first semester in which embedded ethics modules were run was spring 2017. Barbara and Allison rightly decided to take small steps, and so targeted especially enthusiastic members of the computer science faculty who were willing to sign up for this experiment. I think in that term they ran modules in 4 classes. Since that time, I ought to have gotten the final number in my head. I confess I don't have it. You can find it on our website. I think we've been in 30 courses, not including somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 to 10 new courses that will be working in or are already working in this academic year. Later on, I'll show you a list of courses that we're working with this term and next term. And our ambition is to keep going and to really hit as much of the computer science curriculum as we can. It's sort of it's clear enough, I think, how ethics is related to certain elements in the computer science curriculum. So it's no accident that what the course that Barbara and I worked on our own was related to artificial intelligence. There's right? A huge conversation at play. But part of what we want to reinforce by distributing as widely as we can is that there are almost no areas of work in computer science that are, if you like, untouched by ethical considerations. So we found ourselves in a wide range of courses, not only in artificial intelligence, but in we've been in some applied math classes. We're in database architecture classes. It's almost, you name it, we're in it. Not quite, but we're continuing to grow and to see a rapid uptake among the CS faculty. I'll mention just two other kind of key high-level features of the program before getting into some more nuts and bolts. The first is that, and here I'm kind of speaking on Barbara and Allison's behalf. You'll hear more about this, I think, when Barbara visits, since I wasn't there at the moment of creation. But a major reason for why we ended up where we are, that is why the program has the shape that it has, is that Barbara and Allison, I think, rightly saw that alternative approaches to getting some form of ethics education into computer science curricula are difficult. So one approach is to build something like a standalone computer science and ethics, or computer science and society course, and maybe even do that really well, make it co-led by an interdisciplinary team of instructors, maybe make it required for everyone in the major. And I want to say, I'm about to mention a challenge for this and for another approach, but again, we don't think that we have kind of a silver bullet here, or that, or even that approaches that don't really look like ours at all might not be best suited for other kinds of institutions. But so you really should take all of this merely to be kind of an explanation. So one thing that we're concerned with that kind of approach is that it sort of removes ethics away from what students are inclined to think of as the core of the CS curriculum. So we develop the standalone class, you go and you do your ethics, but that's done now, and now you go back and you work on algorithmic design, or you work on database architecture, or whatever it is. So maybe you do the ethics first, and then you go off and do the technical stuff, or you do the technical stuff, and then at the end you say, here's this capstone ethics thing, which sort of suggests that you ought to have been thinking about it all along, but we weren't doing anything to encourage it. So we want to avoid sending that signal. A second approach that faces a significant set of challenges is an approach whereby we train computer science faculty to themselves feel comfortable delivering sort of the ethics content themselves. And for those of you familiar with the sort of ethics education literature, we can go and learn about programs that have tried just this. But right away, you can identify some hurdles, right? Someone has to provide the training. CS faculty have to be convinced that it's a good thing. They have to have time to do it, and of course there are ways to incentivize these kinds of things. But if you recall, part of what Barbara had in mind is that there was an urgent demand that she wanted to meet more or less immediately, and again she'll say more about this, but I think recognized some anxiety among her colleagues at the prospect of themselves having to do this, right? I mean, I would be quite anxious if I had to deliver technical content in my introduction to ethics classes, and that's because I have no training. I don't know how to do that. And even if I had, a nice few weeks in the summer, I think I would still, come away feeling quite nervous. Okay, so part of this kind of like guerrilla approach was motivated by attempting to avoid those hurdles and challenges. Okay, and then last key idea, sort of big picture idea that I want to highlight before we move forward, is that our hope is that everything that we're developing could in principle be useful to other educators. So again, that's not because we're fanatically devoted to this model and we think that just anyone will pick it up and be able to run it themselves. But we do think that the kinds of educational tools that we're building could be useful in other kinds of contexts too. And we want to be really careful to avoid, I can't remember which of my colleagues introduced it this way in an interview, but we want to try to avoid the pitfall that universities are going to start thinking about this as a kind of competition to get, the approach to doing ethics in computer science. As one of my colleagues put it, this isn't a team sport that we're trying to win. We're trying to do our part to solve, or at least partially solve, an extremely urgent social problem. And so if we're doing something that's useful in that respect, we want everybody to have access to it. So you can visit our website. I had the address at the beginning. The address will appear again on the final slide. So as we're developing our content, our final stage process is to get everything ready for open access sharing. So as the program has flourished, the leadership has grown. And so I want to draw attention to a couple of folks that I haven't mentioned yet. So Barbara has since retired, and we wanted to be careful to have in place, a well-established team to carry on the work. So Allison and I now co-direct things on the philosophy side, and we have our partners in computer science. Co-directing on that side of things are Radhika Nagpal, who works in sort of bioengineering robotics, and Stephen Chong, who a great bulk of his work in any case is in privacy and security. So I want to tell you a little bit about the work that I'm doing. So in our division of labor, I'm the person who's primarily working on the pedagogical aspects of the program. That is, with the people who are really developing the content and then executing. So that's what I'll mostly focus on for the remainder of my time. So as I said, the way we proceed is to recruit advanced philosophy PhD students, and then we pair them with computer science course heads who volunteer. They just opt in, sometimes with a little prodding from Steve, but usually with not much prodding at all. And the philosophy postdoc is responsible, graduate fellow, as we call him, is responsible for meeting with the course head, discussing with them how they envision some ethical content fitting into their their course, and then the philosophy graduate fellows develop the ethical modules in collaboration among themselves, and then with myself, 2 philosophy postdocs and 2 CS postdocs, in a weekly meeting of what we call the teaching lab. So this is a 2-hour meeting that's dedicated almost entirely to workshopping the developing modules. I'll talk a little bit more in a moment about what that looks like. And then as we're winding down toward the end of the semester, getting the modules ready for open access sharing. So in the typical course of things, a philosophy graduate fellow is assigned to either 3 or 4 CS courses in a term. So because they're developing content that will span 1 or 2 class meetings in a CS course, we can send them to multiple interested parties. This year, the introduction of the CS postdocs is new. So here's something that again came up last night during Q&A. This year, we're lucky to be the recipients of a grant administered by the Mozilla Foundation. This is through what was called the Responsible Computer Science Challenge. And part of our idea in our pitch for that grant was to buy some time from existing computer science postdocs and get them in sort of in the pedagogical lab, so that we have it'd be like kind of on-demand tech consultants. We found that it's extremely important that whatever content we're delivering in the classes is tied as closely as is possible to the technical content in the courses that already exist. So I'll mention just one. Here's a sort of anecdote. I probably won't even get the technical details right, so go easy on me. So this year we're in a database course. And I was talking with the graduate fellow who's assigned with that and with one of our CS postdocs. And we had decided that that courses module would focus to some degree or other on privacy. And Shaborna, the CS postdoc, said, "Oh, okay. Well, we'll have to. We should really talk about column storage because they'll be learning about column storage and building databases that make use of column storage." And then, she got a few more sentences in, and I and Heather, the philosophy graduate fellow, said, "Can you try again? What's column storage?" And a few minutes later, we had gotten, after asking some questions, Shaborna said, "Okay, here's what a database is." And so we really kind of got back to ground level. But then only 5 to 10 minutes later, Shaborna had revealed to us that in building databases, we have a kind of trade-off in computational efficiency for reading from them and writing to them. So if you want to build a database that's really easy to retrieve information from, it's probably not going to be a database that it's easy to edit the content of, including making deletions, which you might think are important in some contexts for ensuring privacy. And so you might think, we should just tell Google, when I hit the delete button, just arrange things so that we get a kind of instantaneous physical delete of my information. And it turns out that ain't gonna happen if you want to be able to search your past emails with any kind of reasonable speed. And so this is exactly the kind of outcome we were hoping for when we were getting, when we sort of had this idea of getting the CS postdocs and the grad fellows an opportunity to have close conversation with each other as we're building the content. And so now that module is under development now, and will highlight exactly this feature of a storage technique that the students would be working on anyway in this database class, absent the ethics module. I sort of ended up going from the bottom of this list up. I'm going to give a lot of credit here to our 2 philosophy postdocs. They're really kind of, in my mind, they're really kind of running the pedagogical show. I'm there to lend what assistance I can and to put out fires and to help with administrative tasks and so on. But we're lucky to have two really excellent philosophy postdocs who have spent a lot of time thinking about ethics pedagogy. as I said, it's a bit blurry, huh? As I said, a standard term will see a graduate fellow working on 3 or 4 courses. So here are the list of courses that we're working on this semester and next. And I see actually there ought to be a 10th item on the this semester list. That's Steve's fault. It's not my fault. And off the top of my head, I'd say roughly half of these are new. So we do have some repeats from previous years. And as you can see, we have some course numbers with 2 digits in Harvard system that those represent introductory level courses. The 100 level courses are mixed advanced undergrad and grad, and the 200 level courses are grad. It turns out also the computer scientists designed the course number so that the tens digit has representational content. So the numeral in the tens space corresponds to areas of computer science, areas of teaching computer. I don't know, maybe that's common. So yeah, you do it too. Yeah, I mean it's not surprising, I suppose, that you guys built this neat representational system using numbers. I can't reproduce this off the top of my head, but you know, some of this is hardware, some of this is theoretical stuff, some of this is applied math, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what we're up to. That's what we're up to this term. I just want to, as I said, highlight some of what I think has been really encouraging about what we're doing, and then end with a couple of questions that I think confront us as we move forward. So first, I mean, this is really something that I don't think we could have taken for granted at the beginning. There's been tremendous enthusiasm among both the students and the computer science faculty. So we have some instruments for collecting feedback from the students, you know, quite simple measures, but you know, we're like doing really well on our Likert scores for you know, enthusiasm about the content, for seeing another embedded ethics module in the future, et cetera. The students have kindly written up a couple of pieces in the Harvard newspaper calling for sort of more of the same and for greater attention to ethics education elsewhere. And the CS faculty have just been tremendously welcoming and enthusiastic partners. I mentioned earlier the Responsible Computer Science Challenge. One thing that was sort of exciting as we learned more about that challenge after we had been announced as one of the winners, is that we learned that some of the folks who also won had made explicit reference to our program in their own applications and said, you know, we'd like to try something like that. And so we have at least some evidence. I mean, that's you know, not overwhelming evidence, but great some evidence that it's an attractive enough idea to other people working in this pedagogical space that they might like to try it themselves. And we have even more evidence that there are other academic units internal to Harvard that would also like to try their hand at something like this approach. So it's probably I don't know, I suppose to protect their privacy, I'll not name them since we're in sort of the early stages of figuring out how this might work. But you know, more than a few other academic units have approached us and said, that looks neat. Can we try something as well? And then the last kind of exciting bit I'll mention is that the collaboration, while it is straightforwardly a teaching collaboration, has also given rise to some research output. So as in my own experience in teaching with Barbara, some of our PhD students have, while developing their modules, thought, you know what, I actually really have something that I'd like to say about fairness and bias in machine learning, or something to say about privacy as it's understood in this engineering setting. And again, as we said last night, I think that's it's much to philosophy's credit if we get more of that happening. There's not enough of it happening, and there's not enough of it happening in close conversation with technical experts. Okay, so a couple challenges that are on my mind anyway. Here, I suppose I'm speaking mostly for myself, and not for my colleagues. So while the prospect of expansion, both outside of Harvard and within it, is exciting, it also confronts us with some real challenges. So in my list of the regular attendees of the teaching lab, we see some real human capital there, right? There's a philosophy faculty member, we've got postdocs from multiple disciplines, we've got PhD students who would otherwise be doing other kinds of teaching duties, now dedicating their time here. So when departments X, Y, and Z approach us and say, can we try something like this too? We're not in a position to say, yes, we have 12 other advanced PhD students waiting in the wings to assist you in developing content. So one thing we're trying to think about carefully is what would it look like to build out sort of the human capacity that would be required to do this at a larger scale. Similarly, for departments beyond Harvard, they'll have to think to themselves, what would it take for me in my institution with my barriers and opportunities to realize something like this vision. And then lastly, something that's been much in my mind, and this is the idea that I thought was at least adjacent to the question earlier, is the question of evaluation. So we are optimistic that embedding and distributing will pay dividends over the long term, but this is at least so far as we know, it's not exactly novel, but it's a quite unusual pedagogical approach, and we don't have good existing evaluative and assessment tools to measure success. As I said, we built some ourselves. We consider those kind of our first steps. But one thing we'd really like to do is to be in a position where we can get some assessment scientists to really sit down with us and craft sort of custom material. We need to sort of figure out what would it take to know whether this is making a difference, and then we need to start measuring it in that way. And I think that goes, by the way, for other kinds of pedagogical interventions in this space too. I gave you some reasons to be skeptical of the build a standalone class and then do it, but it's at least in part an empirical hypothesis. Maybe it turns out that that approach really does work, but first we have to figure out what it would look like to know whether it's working, and then we have to go and we have to find out. So those are two challenges that are much in my mind. So I think I'll open things up now, but there's my email address. If you have thoughts, if you want to learn more, or say, here's some exciting input, and you don't get to ask your question or share your insight today, please get in touch. We really think of this as a collaborative enterprise. And there's our URL for you to go nose around. You can find out a little more information. There's this video of me and Barbara talking about things. There's the full list of modules, etc. So thanks very much.